So let's talk more about protein. This is the king of macronutrients, and everyone else is on this constant pursuit of getting enough protein. So that begs the question, where do we get our protein? Well, before we look for it in diet, let's make sure that everyone's exactly clear. Let's talk about what a protein actually is and how it's used as an element of life. Proteins are the building blocks of life. They form the basis for every structure and function in all living organisms, makes up the enzymes, the fibers, the hormones, the fingernails, the antibodies, on and on and on. However, protein is not a food group. This is not a protein, this is an egg. Eggs contain protein, but so do potatoes and beans and all things living. Every plant contains every amino acid in different ratios. It's the same in every single living cell. So it's interesting because we contain not just protein, we contain thousands of different proteins. It's not a single substance like everyone thinks. So it's not like we can say that metal adequately describes iron, aluminum, or gold. Protein just isn't descriptive enough. We need to know more. Our real quest in dietary protein is to acquire the necessary essential amino acids for life. Loosely speaking, there are 20 amino acids, which act pretty much like the 26 letters of the alphabet. When one digests a plant or an animal protein, they're broken down into the individual letters, and then we reconstruct them into words and sentences and paragraphs of our genetic book of life. The problem is that no animal makes all 20 amino acids. So it's kind of like protein jeopardy, and you have to buy a vowel through diet to complete the words. So this brings us back to the original question. Where do we get our protein? Well, I want to dig a little deeper here and hope to drive home the point that each of the 10 trillion cells in your body have thousands of different proteins that carry out an amazing array of activity that we call life. The DNA of all organisms is the blueprint for the tens of thousands of proteins that make up all living cells. Animals, unlike plants, must acquire some of the amino acid building blocks, the essential amino acids, through diet, and then these are used in our ribosomes as part of the RNA printing press to produce the myriad proteins required for all of our various structures and physiological life-giving functions. So we basically don't need dietary protein in a strict biological sense. Rather, we need a source of nitrogen to synthesize the non-essential amino acids and a dietary source of essential amino acids, the subset of amino acids we can't make ourselves in our body. Despite our need for a subset of essential amino acids, the 10 to 25,000 different proteins are synthesized in cellular ribosomes. This term protein was a convenient isocaloric organic chemistry organization scheme that started over 170 years ago, and it's stuck. So now I want to answer the question accurately and concisely in a way that you probably haven't heard this answered before. Where do you get your protein? It's synthesized in our ribosomes, and it doesn't originate in diet. Let's take this one step further and remind ourselves where essential amino acids originate. Basically, how many of you are tired of this conflicting diet advice about protein, carbs, and fat? Using protein, carbohydrates, and fat as food groups is so dated and antiquated, and it leads to what I love to call macroconfusion. These terms are from organic and biochemistry, and they're just not specific. They don't even tell you what to do in terms of what to eat. It doesn't make any sense at any level. So much so, my favorite example of this is that in 2018, in a Lancet journal, there was an article that concluded that both a low carb and a high carb diet increased mortality. What do we even do with that information? It's completely meaningless. We don't even know what that means. To complicate matters even further, most foods have some combination of protein, carbohydrate, and fat. When you look at all whole plant foods, they have some combination, some ratio of all three of these macronutrients. So does it really matter? I argue that no, it really doesn't matter. We need to change the conversation back to things that we understand. And this is from everyone from the media and the layperson all the way to healthcare professionals and researchers who are trying to understand how to recommend what to eat, what's optimal on a diet. So another way to do this is to talk about food groups. And this is a mnemonic called the food triangle that we can use to bring the conversation back to food. Basically, the organization here, it shows by energy density. So as you go down the triangle, you'll see the different, that gets increasing in energy density. This helps individuals address micronutrient requirements, which we get primarily from the apex or the top of the triangle, without driving chronic overnutrition, which we'll see at the bottom of the triangle. So at the apex of the triangle over here, you'll see leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, stems such as asparagus and celery, bulbs, and mushrooms. These foods at the top become the nutritional foundation of daily meals, rather than the more energy-dense alternatives that you see at the bottom. They also provide a very rich source of phytonutrition and fiber, which can be eaten in unlimited quantities, basically. And these are so important for the microbiome. I argue that phytonutrients and fiber are the two most important nutrients that we can consume. Down each descending side of the food triangle, energy density increases. The food on the left side is sourced from animal products, and on the right side, it's sourced from plants. We could look at diets as combination of the various sides of the food triangle, and it could be used to predict success with various diets as well as health. Here we see the blue dots representing the diet emphasis. In Atkins or paleo, or now we've got the keto diet we're dealing with, would be down the left side. So perhaps this can control for weight. This would explain why people lose weight eating this way, because it limits starchy foods from the right side of the food triangle. Sometimes dairy or red meat or other specific animal source products are also eliminated on some of these diets. Now, for comparison, the Western diet tends to be focused more on the bottom. So meat sauce and pasta, curry and rice, meat and potatoes, fish and chips, burger and fries. So we like to call this bottom feeding. This makes for the most energy dense meals, and we submit that obesity and chronic overnourishment is an unintended consequence of this type of eating. You may be surprised that a vegetarian diet is also grouped at the bottom here too, definitely with some improvements. But if you add eggs and dairy to a whole food plant-based diet, this expands the potential for bottom feeding. Just for example, a cheese pizza, eggs and a bagel, fettuccine Alfredo. And this also may lead to weight gain and chronic diseases. Of course, making this even more risky are the highly refined food adulterants, sugar, salt, oil, and flour, which aren't included in the food triangle. And those find our way onto our plates as well. Now, if you look at the right side of the triangle, that's where you would see a vegan diet. So this emphasizes plant source starches as the primary energy sources. The exception here would be nuts and seeds, which are excellent source of phytonutrients and the necessary 1 to 3% of essential fatty acids that are required. A word of caution is about these new products that are out there. And in the first time in my 16 years teaching plant-based nutrition, I have vegan clients coming to me with the same health issues as the omnivores. And when I look at their food journals, it's because they think there's like this health halo with vegan and plant-based. And you really do want to stick to the whole plant foods, because that's where all of the magic that we will talk about begins. So you could see how we could use this to talk about food and to actually answer all of the questions that people have about foods and eliminate all of that confusing talk that comes from identifying and trying to group together macros. There is no perfect macronutrient ratio. That's why there's so much debate. It's so much better to get away from these terms and to get closer to talking about food. And another way to say that would be to keep eating right. So I want to assure you today that it really doesn't matter where you get your protein. A whole food plant-based diet provides plenty of nutrition. Drop the macronutrient labels and let's return the conversation back to real foods. So basically, I love to say to my list, I want you to eat vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, mushrooms, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices in infinite tasty combinations.